Does Treasury look at IMF forecasts when preparing your own forecasts?
Yes, Senator, we do.
Do you think they're of reasonable quality?
I won't speak for them. The IMF's a very reputable body. They obviously don't look at Australia with the depth that we or the Reserve Bank do. But yes, I would say the IMF is credible.
Do you have any experts here today on Slovakia?
Do we have any expertise on Slovakia?
Yeah.
Not particularly, no, Senator.
You've got no one here today who can talk about IMF forecasts in relation to Slovakia.
No, Senator. We, in Treasury, we have a global economy team in Treasury, and we track global forecasts, but we tend to focus on our largest trading partners and the largest economies in the world.
Okay, the reason I'm asking you about Slovakia is because Australia's headline inflation is projected by the IMF to be 3.6%, which is second only to Slovakia.
Yes, I understood why you were going down there, but...
So why do you think that is, Mr.
Well, I don't think it's surprising that we don't have a person who's fully fluent in Slovakian economic parameters.
So why do you think Australia's inflation is the highest in the world apart from Slovakia?
So if I can make a couple of comments and then my colleagues may wish to add to this. There's a few points I'd make, Senator. One is that Australia is on the record as having peaked. Our inflation cycle has varied. While the similar drivers have been at the core of it, it has varied from other countries in its timing. We peaked later, we peaked lower. Lower than Canada, Germany, Italy, UK, US. They all peaked at higher rates of inflation than we did. So we've generally tended to lag the inflation cycle of other countries. We also have had interest rates here in Australia rise by less than many other countries, comparable countries in the advanced grouping. In Australia, interest rates have risen by about 425 basis points. In the US, I think it's 525 basis points. In the UK, it's over 500. New Zealand, over 500. So there have been different policy responses as well. That is why, fundamentally, we see Australia's inflation rate sitting a little above those other advanced economies. But, as has been discussed earlier today, we and the Reserve Bank continue to see both headline and trimmed mean or underlying inflation coming down steadily, and we expect it to be back in the band shortly.
So what's the RBA's forecast for headline inflation?
I'll ask my colleague to speak to that. It was just released yesterday.
Yep, they're so for which period, Senator?
Over the next year.
Over the next year, so going to June 2025, they've got the headline CPI at 2.5%.
2.5%? And what about the year ended 2025?
The year ended 2025 at 3.7.
3.7. Okay. So, what's Treasury's forecast for that period?
We don't publish forecasts, Senator, for the December period. For a long-standing practice, we'd forecast June in the budget and publish that number.
Okay.
So we were at budget 2.75 in both June 2025 and June 2026, and we are working on our forecasts now for the MYEFO at the end of the year.
Okay, but just so I get this right, because there's a lot of numbers here. So the Reserve Bank is saying that CPI will be 3.7% the year ended December 2025.
That's correct, Senator, in our latest statement.
Okay. So it seems to me that the Treasurer and the Finance Minister were out during media interviews saying that the IMF forecast of 3.6% was wrong.
No, I never said that. And I don't believe the Treasurer has ever said that.
So you weren't suggesting the IMF forecast was inaccurate?
No.
Okay.
No, I have never done that.
And so what do you say then, that the Reserve Bank is forecasting this inflation figure of 3.7%?
To me?
Yeah, what do you say to that?
Well, I think they're the Reserve Bank's forecasts, and questions about them should be put to the Reserve Bank.
Okay, so you don't dispute the IMF's predictions here?
I said they are not the Treasury forecast when I was asked.
Okay, so you're not disputing them, but you're not necessarily.
Well, they're a matter for the IMF. They're not the Treasury forecast, and we rely on the Treasury forecast when we're making decisions.
Well, let me ask you this then: is 3.6 and 3.7 a sort of similar figure?
to me. So as I said, Senator, we have not finalised our forecast for the MyEFA at this stage, and we don't forecast explicitly and publish a December through the year number. We focus on June. But in MyEFA, we will present the information that we have, taking into account all factors.
Okay. So the IMF is predicting 3.6, right?
Correct.
Okay. And the RBA is predicting 3.7.
Correct.
Okay. Would you say 3.6 and 3.7 are similar numbers?
Yes, Senator.
They are similar numbers, okay. Because it seems to me that, Minister, that you were suggesting yesterday, I think it was yesterday on radio with Patricia Karvelas on the ABC.
No, wrong.
Was it yesterday? When
No, it wasn't on radio.
Well, when was it?
It was in estimates yesterday.
Was it? No, but were you interviewed by Patricia Karvelas
I'm
recently?
regularly interviewed by PICO.
Okay. When was your last interview, do you think, with her?
I think it was last Thursday.
Okay. And did you have a discussion
Maybe.
about the IMF's forecasts?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Well,
I did have one the week before that, which may be the one where the IMF forecast had just come out, and
yeah. Was
yes.
it 24th of October?
Okay, there you go.
Might have been. So you did have a conversation with Ms. Karvelas about the IMF's forecasts.
I had an interview around. It's a broad interview around the state of the economy here, and
Okay.
I think she did ask a question about that. And my answer to that, if I recall it correctly, was that those are not the government's forecasts. And I went on to explain about, if you'd like me, I could read out the answer I gave her more generally, but I was talking in broad about the state of our economy, strength of the labour market, creation of jobs, delivering surplus budgets, getting inflation back to band.
Yeah,
So we had all of
talking
those.
points, yeah. Yep.
Well, they're not talking points, they're facts.
So I think what you said in the interview was that the IMF's figures don't identically match up. That's what you said.
Okay?
So,
Well, I'll trust you on that.
so you're saying that 3.6 and 3.7 are materially different figures, are you?
Well, the RBA's figures aren't the government's figures, or aren't the Treasury's figures.
That's right.
Yeah.
But 3.6 and 3.7 is still pretty similar numbers, wouldn't you say?
Well, I wasn't asked that question.
Okay, well, I think most people would look at that and say, well, the IMF...
If, for example, if Patricia Karvelas had asked me, and she couldn't have because these only came out yesterday, if you look at the RBA's figures that will be released in a week and compare them to what the IMF is releasing overnight, what's your view on that? That would have been a different question, but that wasn't the one that I was asked.
Well, she was effectively asking you, well, she asked you, why does Australia have the second highest inflation in the world?
Yeah, and I explained for all the reasons that we've gone through this morning.
Yeah, but the IMF is giving
later
the same...
and lower here, and it's following a similar trajectory to that we're seeing around other like economies.
Well,
So that is the answer I gave, which is correct. And I also drew out that interest rates are lower here than many of those, and remain lower despite some of those central banks cutting interest rates. So interest rates peaked here lower than in other other countries. Our inflation challenge arrived later. It peaked lower. It's come down in a similar way to what we've been seeing around the world.
I think you'll find that with the RBA is predicting that inflation will be 3.7% year ending 2025. That is still going to be very high in any person's measure, wouldn't you say?
Sorry,
Well, the RBA is saying, Minister, that inflation is going to be 3.7% in the year ending 2025. So I think most people would say that's outside the band and represents a high rate of inflation.
Well, I wasn't talking to the RBA's forecast. I was talking to the information that the government had. The Treasury forecasts were included in the budget. They'll be updated in my EFO. And I was talking about how we inherited inflation with a 6 in front of it. It then peaked at 7.8% in the December quarter of 2022, and it has come down considerably. The last monthly inflation was at 2.1. The quarterly was at 2.8, I think, September quarter. So I don't think you can sit here and not acknowledge that those are the facts.
Are you disappointed that inflation is predicted to be 3.7% at the end of next year?
I am focused, as is the Treasurer, on making sure that we do whatever we can to get inflation back into band, which it has come in the nearest possible time, based on the things that are within our control, you know, and we've always taken responsibility for that, and will continue to do so.
It sounds like you are disappointed.
Well, I think all of us want to deal... I would be surprised if there was anyone looking at the economy who didn't want to see inflation get lower sooner. Like, seriously. But I think at the same time, people also want people to stay in jobs, and they want to earn good wages, and they want a whole range of other things as well. So this has always been, you know, a balance. I mean, the bank calls it the narrow path from time to time. This has always been a balance. We haven't had a negative quarter of growth. Like, growth is weak. But we haven't had a negative quarter of growth like other economies. We haven't seen the job losses either. I mean, these are good things.
But my question was, are you disappointed that it's going to be 3.7%?
And I've answered that. I've answered it.
The answer is what, no or yes?
Well, I've answered it. If you didn't listen to it, that's your problem.
No, I did listen, but it wasn't clear to me what exactly the answer was.
Well, I've answered it.
Okay, we'll assume that you are disappointed with that, because I think most people would be disappointed.
Assume away.
You spent a long time in government and you haven't been able to.
A long time in government. You were 10 years in government.
Long enough.
And left a whole range of things not dealt with.
Enough.
We have done more in 2 years than you guys did in a decade.
Okay.
You're the highest inflation in the world, pretty much.
I'm at the point where I'll say that I'm looking for a discrete question and a discrete answer. So is there a question?
I think that's been a very...
I'll share the call. Anyone over here seeking the call?
Yes.